There's a moment that exists in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Not the moment when the referee blew the final whistle. Not the moment when the final score was confirmed. But the moment that came approximately 17 minutes into the second half, when something shifted fundamentally in the architecture of what was supposed to be a routine international fixture. A moment when a professional sporting event, structured by centuries of established protocol, suddenly became something that no protocol had actually prepared anyone to manage. France versus Paraguay. A World Cup qualifier on a Wednesday evening in September, the kind of match that appears on the fixture list and registers as important to those invested in either nation, unremarkable to everyone else. The stadium in Lyon was at capacity. TV audiences across Europe were engaged, but not fervent. This was football in its ordinary state, professional, structured, predictable in the way that contemporary international football has become predictable. Then something happened that transformed it into something else entirely. Not a controversial call, not an unusual incident, but a cascade of events that, when examined individually, might each have been manageable, but when examined collectively across the span of approximately 8 minutes, revealed something that FIFA's operational structure had never genuinely anticipated having to address. A scenario so thoroughly outside the normal parameters of contingency planning that the officials in charge found themselves making decisions in real time without any actual precedent to guide them. This is the story of what transpired in that stadium. It's also the story of what it reveals about the fragility of systems that appear robust until they encounter something they were never designed to manage. Section 1, the set hope. The teams had arrived with clear tactical intentions. France, ranked among the world's elite, positioned themselves as the favorites. They carried the weight of expectation. Paraguay, operating from a position of less global visibility, arrived with the tactical sophistication of a team that understood exactly what they were attempting to accomplish. They had studied France extensively. They had constructed a formation designed to frustrate, to compress space, to convert defensive solidity into occasional attacking opportunities through rapid transitions. The first 30 minutes played out predictably. France controlled possession. Paraguay defended with discipline. The midfield became a zone of contested space where neither team could establish clear dominance. The crowd sensed a match that would likely be decided through a single lapse in concentration rather than through overwhelming superiority. Then France scored. A movement initiated in midfield progressed through a sequence of passes that demonstrated why France's technical quality elevated them above most opponents. A cross delivered with precision. A header executed with timing. The ball was in the net. 1-0 to France. The script appeared to be following its expected trajectory. Paraguay's response came with the kind of directness that teams employing their tactical philosophy typically employ. They didn't attempt to match France's technical sophistication. They instead accelerated their counterattacking. They pushed bodies forward. They accepted defensive vulnerability in exchange for genuine attacking threat. The crowd that had been relatively calm became engaged. The match that had seemed destined for comfortable French dominance suddenly contained genuine uncertainty. And then somewhere in the 19th minute of the second half, everything changed. Section 2. The incident. A Paraguayan player was fouled near the midfield line. A clear foul, undisputed. The referee, who had been consistent throughout the match in his decision-making, pointed to the free kick spot and gestured that Paraguay possessed the ball. The free kick was taken. A direct attempt at goal launched with considerable force, but struck without sufficient accuracy to trouble the French goalkeeper. The ball passed wide, but that's not where the incident originated. That's just the preliminary event that created the circumstances for what followed. As the ball was being retrieved from behind the goal line, a French player and a Paraguayan player became entangled near the technical area. Not violently, not dramatically. Just two players in proximity to each other, both pushing for position, both trying to establish some advantage for the upcoming throw-in or corner kick or whatever restart was going to follow. The referee didn't initially observe this interaction. He was positioned elsewhere on the field, focused on the flow of play. A linesman, however, had a clear view, and what the linesman observed was one French player making contact with a Paraguayan player in a manner that, according to the rulebook's specific language, constituted a red card offense, direct violent conduct. That's the terminology in action designed to harm or intending to harm, separate from the context of attempting to play the ball. The rulebook is deliberately precise about this, because distinguishing between a tackle that's aggressive and physical but legitimate and contact that crosses the threshold into violence is fundamental to the sport's integrity. The linesman signaled to the referee. The referee, now aware that something had occurred that he hadn't personally witnessed, needed to make a decision. Did he accept the linesman's account? Did he require the linesman to articulate what he had observed? Did he issue a red card based on someone else's description of an event that had occurred outside his direct line of sight? This is where systems become strained because the rulebook permits referees to act on information from their assistants, but the rulebook doesn't actually specify how much discussion needs to occur beforehand. It doesn't specify whether the assistant must describe the incident in detail or whether a simple signal is sufficient. The referee issued a red card, Section 3, the eruption. The red card itself generated immediate protest. The French player, understanding that a red card meant not just removal from the match, but potential suspension in subsequent matches, and potential financial fines and potential damage to his reputation, approached the referee with vehement objection. He insisted that his contact with the Paraguayan player had been incidental, that he had not intended violence, that the referee had misunderstood the situation. The referee, having issued the card, now possessed very limited options for reconsidering. He could potentially rescind the decision if he determined he had made an error, but reversing a red card carries its own complications. It signals to everyone observing that the referee was capable of fundamental misjudgment. It undermines his authority in subsequent decisions. So the referee maintained the red card. The French coaching staff, observing this situation from the bench, became increasingly animated. The head coach approached the technical area and began communicating with the fourth official. He was requesting clarification. He was requesting that the incident be reviewed. He was requesting, essentially, that the decision be reconsidered. But this is where the systems truly became strained, because modern football exists in an era where video review is theoretically available. VAR, video assistant referee, exists precisely for these situations, when there's ambiguity, when there's disagreement, when officials need additional perspectives. The VAR system should have been activated, should have been reviewing the incident from multiple angles, should have been providing the on-field referee with detailed information about what actually transpired. Instead, there was confusion about whether this incident warranted VAR review. Some officials believed it did, some officials believed it didn't. The incident had occurred partially off the ball, which in some interpretations suggested it fell outside VAR's purview. In other interpretations, it fell directly within it. While this administrative confusion was playing out, the match was essentially frozen. The French team was now down to 10 players. Paraguay was now effectively up a man. The tactical balance had shifted entirely. The match that had been competitive was now structurally compromised. Section 4, the escalation. What happened next was not explicitly planned by anyone, but it emerged organically from the frustration that the French team and coaching staff were experiencing. If the system wasn't going to properly review the incident, if the referee wasn't going to reconsider, if the proper protocols weren't going to be followed, then perhaps the only language the system would understand was disruption. The French team began deliberately slowing the pace of play. Players took excessive time with throw-ins. The goalkeeper took the maximum permitted time for goal kicks. Substitutions were made slowly, not in a way that violated any specific rule, but in a way that communicated frustration through the only mechanism available to them. Paraguay, recognizing what was happening, responded by becoming more aggressive. They accelerated their pressing, they pushed bodies forward aggressively, and within 3 minutes, a second incident occurred. A Paraguayan player committed a challenge that was undoubtedly a foul. The referee issued a yellow card, but the intensity of the moment meant that the yellow card felt insufficient. It felt like a failure of proportional response to what was an escalating situation. Then a French player, frustrated by everything that had transpired, made a gesture toward the referee. Not a violent gesture, not directly insulting, but a gesture that clearly communicated disagreement with the official. The referee, now operating in an environment of tension, interpreted this as dissent and issued a second yellow card to the French player. Now France had 2 players removed from the field. They were down to 9 men. The match had become essentially unwatchable from a competitive perspective. A team at full strength was now facing a team with 9 players. The result was no longer in question. The only question was whether the 9-player team could hold on to a scoreline or whether Paraguay would score additional goals. Section 5, the administrative breakdown. At this point, something remarkable happened. The fourth official made a decision. He communicated to the referee that the situation had escalated beyond what normal match management could resolve. He suggested, and the referee agreed, that the match needed to be paused. Not halted, not abandoned, but paused while senior officials attempted to address what had become an administrative crisis. The players were instructed to leave the field. They retreated to the dressing rooms. The stadium, which had been erupting in noise, fell into a strange quiet. People began checking their phones. Journalists began reporting that something unprecedented was happening, that a match had been essentially suspended midway through the second half. Inside the stadium, the referee was in communication with FIFA's match commissioner. The match commissioner is a senior official appointed by FIFA to oversee major matches and ensure that proper protocols are followed. The commissioner reviewed the video footage of the initial incident. The commissioner attempted to determine whether the red card had been appropriate, and here's where the administrative structure revealed its genuine fragility. Because the match commissioner reviewing the footage could not definitively determine whether the red card was justified. The contact had been ambiguous. It was possible to interpret it as violent conduct. It was also possible to interpret it as incidental contact that hadn't crossed the threshold into deliberate violence. The commissioner was now in a position where he needed to make a decision that would determine the entire outcome of the match. If he upheld the red card, the match would resume with France at 9 players, essentially guaranteeing Paraguay a victory. If he rescinded the red card, he would be admitting that the original decision was incorrect, which would constitute a fundamental undermining of the referee's authority. There was no good option. There was only the least damaging option, and the commissioner, after substantial deliberation, decided that the incident was sufficiently ambiguous that it warranted a different approach. He decided remarkably that the red card would be rescinded, that the player would return to the field, but that a different consequence would be applied, a substantial fine, to be determined by FIFA's disciplinary committee for what was determined to be excessive contact, even if not rising to the level of violent conduct. Section 6. The resumption and aftermath. When the match resumed, the atmosphere was entirely transformed. The crowd, which had been divided between French and Paraguayan supporters, was now unified in confusion. The French team, which had been playing 9 against 11, was now playing 11 against 11. The tactical situation had shifted again, but the damage had been done, not just tactically but psychologically. The match that had been a straightforward competitive encounter had become a referendum on FIFA's administrative capacity. Every decision that followed was now scrutinized with extraordinary intensity. When the referee made a call, both teams questioned it. When fouls were committed, both teams protested. Remarkably, despite all of this, the match concluded without further extraordinary incident. France ultimately won 2-1. The scoreline was never in serious doubt after Paraguay's hopes of an upset had been diminished by the period in which they had the numerical advantage. But the scoreline was almost irrelevant to what had actually transpired. Section SE then, the larger exchanges. What happened in that stadium revealed something profound about modern football's administrative structure. The systems that govern professional football at the highest level are remarkably sophisticated. There are protocols for nearly every conceivable situation. There are decision-making hierarchies. There are video review systems designed specifically to address ambiguity. And yet, when faced with a situation that was genuinely ambiguous, where reasonable officials could disagree about whether a particular contact constituted a red card offense, the system essentially broke down, not catastrophically. Not in a way that prevented the match from concluding, but in a way that demonstrated that the system's sophistication masks a fundamental vulnerability. The vulnerability is this: football, at its core, requires human judgment. It requires officials making decisions based on their interpretation of whether specific contact violates specific rules. And sometimes that judgment is going to be genuinely contestable. No amount of video review removes the fundamental ambiguity from certain situations. Modern football has attempted to solve this problem through increasingly sophisticated technology and administrative structure. Video review systems, multiple official perspectives, detailed rulebooks. But these innovations actually reveal, rather than conceal, the fundamental limitation. You cannot technologically solve a problem that is fundamentally interpretive in nature. The match between France and Paraguay became a public demonstration of this limitation. It became a situation where FIFA's administrative apparatus was visibly strained by a situation it was theoretically designed to manage, but practically unprepared for. Section 8. The response. In the days that followed, FIFA issued statements. The statements acknowledged that the incident was ambiguous. The statements suggested that the decision to rescind the red card was the appropriate response given that ambiguity. The statements indicated that the match commissioner had acted within his authority in making this determination. But what the statements couldn't address was the deeper revelation that had occurred, that the system, when confronted with genuine ambiguity, essentially improvises, that the supposedly rigid structure of professional football rules actually contains substantial flexibility when situations demand it, that FIFA's officials are capable of reversing decisions, reinterpreting rules, and making fundamentally different determinations when circumstances require it. This had substantial implications for how subsequent matches would be perceived. If a referee made a decision in a future match, observers would now wonder whether that decision was irreversible, or whether it was contingent on escalation and administrative intervention. The certainty that had previously characterized football's decision-making had been replaced by a recognition that decisions were potentially revisable under certain circumstances. Section 9. The broader context. The match between France and Paraguay was not an isolated incident. It was one moment in a longer pattern of football struggling to balance the sport's fundamental need for consistent, clear decision-making with the sport's fundamental reality that many situations are genuinely ambiguous and resist clear categorization. VAR, introduced to address ambiguity, had instead highlighted just how much ambiguity exists in football. Situations that seemed clear to some observers appeared entirely different to others. Angles that seemed definitive from one camera angle appeared less definitive from another. The technology had promised to eliminate controversy. Instead, it had demonstrated that controversy was embedded in the fundamental nature of the sport. The match between France and Paraguay exposed this in particularly stark fashion. It demonstrated that even FIFA's most senior officials, when confronted with genuine ambiguity, were willing to make extraordinary decisions, rescinding red cards, pausing matches, essentially rewriting what had happened in order to address situations that the ordinary system couldn't properly manage. Section 10. The lasting impact. Years from now, when football historians examine this period, the match between France and Paraguay will likely feature prominently, not because of the final scoreline, not because of any particular player's performance, but because it revealed something fundamental about how professional football actually operates at the highest level. It operates not through rigid, unchangeable rules, but through principles that are flexibly interpreted by officials exercising judgment. When that judgment becomes contestable, the system has limited tools for resolution beyond administrative intervention and potentially extraordinary decisions. The match also revealed something about the psychology of confrontation within institutional systems. The French coaching staff's decision to pressure the system, to make clear that they believed the situation was unjust, ultimately succeeded. The system responded by reconsidering its position. This created a dangerous precedent that sufficient pressure could reverse even definitive decisions. What the match ultimately demonstrated was that professional football, despite its appearance of rigid structure and clear rules, is actually fundamentally reliant on consensus. When officials make decisions that violate perceived consensus about what the rules mean or how they should be applied, the system becomes vulnerable. And when that vulnerability is exposed, the system's response is to make extraordinary accommodations rather than to defend the original decision. Closing, the match between France and Paraguay concluded with a French victory. The players left the field. The crowd dispersed. The news cycle moved forward to the next sporting event, the next controversy, the next moment demanding attention. But something had shifted. Football's administrators had been compelled to confront the gap between the system they believe they operate and the system that actually exists. They had been forced to improvise. They had been forced to make decisions that contradicted their own stated protocols. And most importantly, they had demonstrated that when genuine ambiguity exists at the heart of football, the system's capacity to manage that ambiguity is limited. Technology can review incidents from multiple angles. Video can be examined repeatedly. Senior officials can deliberate extensively. But ultimately, football remains a game where human beings are required to make judgments. And those judgments, when they conflict with other human beings' judgments, create situations that the sport's administrative structure was never truly designed to navigate. The match between France and Paraguay exposed this truth. It revealed that professional football operates not through the rigid application of rules, but through the flexible interpretation of principles by officials exercising judgment. And when that judgment becomes sufficiently contested, the system's response is not to defend the rules, but to rewrite them in real time. That revelation will likely persist far longer than anyone's memory of the final scoreline.